Here's something they don't always tell you about Dutch work culture. Saying jij to the wrong person can make you sound unprofessional, even rude. But how do you know when to use u instead of je? And what do you actually say in a formal situation? This is one of those small things that makes actually a big difference, especially when you're meeting clients, managers, or anyone you want to impress. Get it right and you sound polished and respectful from the very first handshake. And in this video, you'll learn exactly how to greet people professionally in Dutch. You'll hear a real business conversation, understand when to be formal, and practice saying hoe gaat het met u? Like you've been doing it for years. Ready to sound confident in any setting? Let's dive in. So there's a big difference in the Netherlands between formal and informal. So in this real workplace conversation you will learn how to greet someone formally and ask how they are doing. So what is the situation? So as mentioned, it's a formal first meeting and it's at a corporate event. So it's a corporate network event and two professionals, one from management and one from a partner company, they meet for the first time. And I mentioned that it's one person from management and a partner company to show you that in this case there is a level of formality needed, right? One is the customer and the other one is higher up in the company. So it's going to be a bit of a formal conversation. So what we're going to do, you're going to listen to it first. You try to pick up what it's about. You can make some notes if you want, and then we'll do it again and then you will read along, okay? So let's do the listening only first. So as mentioned, we have two people talking to each other and I will say the name of who's speaking, right? So the first person who's speaking is Marcella de Vos and she says, Goedenavond meneer Van Dijk. And then Erik van Dijk, he says, Goedenavond mevrouw Vos, hoe gaat het met u? And then Marcella Vos says, Prima, dank u. En met u? En dan Erik van Dijk, he says, ook goed, dank u. Right? So I'll repeat it one more time, but then without the names. Goedenavond meneer Van Dijk. Goedenavond mevrouw Vos. Hoe gaat het met u? Prima, dank u. En met u? Ook goed, dank u. Okay, so that was the listening only. Did you get it? Did you get the gist of what we were talking about? I think you might, huh? So let's listen to this conversation again and now you can read along. So here we go. So Marcella Vos, she says, Goedenavond meneer Van Dijk. En dan Erik van Dijk, he says, Goedenavond mevrouw Vos, hoe gaat het met u? And then Marcella Vos says, Prima, dank u. En met u? And then Erik van Dijk says, ook goed, dank u. Okay, I'll repeat it one more time, that time without the names. Goedenavond meneer Van Dijk. Goedenavond mevrouw Vos, hoe gaat het met u? Prima, dank u. En met u? Ook goed, dank u. Right, so I think you picked up some things, but you might wonder what is this exactly about. So we're going to look that in the quick vocabulary builder. So here we go with the quick vocabulary builder and here we will analyze the conversation. So first of all we start with goedenavond. And as we saw in the lecture before, goedenavond means good evening. And then we have meneer. What is meneer? Meneer is Mr. or Sir. And then we have Van Dijk, and that is just the name of the person, right? So meneer Van Dijk, Sir Van Dijk, or Mr. Van Dijk, right? So then we go to the next sentence and then the person repeats it and says also goedenavond, right? That was the formal way of introducing someone. But then we see goedenavond mevrouw. So mevrouw is Mrs. or Madam and her last name is Vos. Vos. So he says good evening Mrs. Vos. And then we go to the next sentence and that is hoe gaat het met u? And that means how are you in English. If you would literally translate it, it would mean how going it with you. So how are you? Hoe gaat het met u? Then Marcella answers with prima, prima. and that means fine. Dank u. And dank u means thank you, and I'll show you that a little later. And then she ends with en met u, and that means and with you. Literally it means and with you. So she says she's doing fine, thank you, and with you, and how are you? Basically it means like that. And then Erik van Dijk zegt ook goed, and that means fine as well, or literally translated also good, fine as well. And then he and they both said thank you, right? And thank you means dank u, and that is formal because we use u here, and later I will explain you the difference between the formal you and the informal you. Okay, so let's summarize this in our vocab summary and pronunciation. So the words we just seen in the conversation, the vocabulary summary and pronunciation. So the first new word was mevrouw, and that means Mrs. or Madam. Then we had meneer, and that is Mr. or Sir. Then we had an important sentence to remember also for you. Hoe gaat het met u? Hoe gaat het met u? And that means how are you? En met u, and that means and with you. Then we have prima, and that means fine. And then we had ook goed, fine as well. And then we had dank u, and that means thank you. Alright, so let's, for pronunciation purposes, repeat after me. Mevrouw, meneer, hoe gaat het met u? En met u, prima, ook goed, dank u. Okay, well done. So now you know the words and the meaning of the conversations. Now I want to push you to practice to speak it out by yourself, right? So speak out exercise. What you're going to do now, you're going to follow me in speaking out this conversation. So repeat after me. Goedenavond, meneer Van Dijk. You say it. Goedenavond, meneer Van Dijk. Yes. Then, goedenavond, mevrouw Vos. Hoe gaat het met u? Goedenavond, mevrouw Vos. Hoe gaat het met u? Yes, repeat, huh? Prima, dank u. En met u? Prima, dank u. En met u? Okay, keep it up. Last sentence. Ook goed, dank u. Ook goed, dank u. Okay, if you want to practice some more, you can pause it here and speak it out by yourself. Otherwise, we will continue with a language insight. So here we are with a language insight. We're going to focus on how to say you at work. So I'm going to explain you the difference between a formal and the informal you. So here you see in the title, je, jij or u. How to say you at work. So in Dutch there are several ways to say you. You can use je, you can use jij, and you can use u. And which one you use depends on the level of formality and the relationship between you and the other person. And this is a common thing in many languages. It's not common in English, but for example in French and in German, those languages I know, there is a difference in formality. So for people from these backgrounds, it's often easy to understand this. But let's explain this. So, je en jij is informal you. Right? So if you talk to someone you and it's an informal, it's a friend, a colleague you see day in, day out, then you can say je or jij. So je is the general neutral form. Je is the general neutral form. And jij is used when you want to emphasize the subject. So that means if you say something specifically you want to emphasize you say jij. So je and jij is basically the same. Only difference is that jij more has an emphasis on the subject. Okay? So in the workplace, people often use je and jij, because once you get to know your colleagues better at the workplace, it's actually quite informal. But often you have to maybe be a little bit more formal, as we saw in the conversation we looked at, right? It's two people, it's one partner company and the other one is a manager. Maybe they don't know each other so well, so they start a little bit more formal. So that's what we're going to look at now. U, and that is the formal you. So u is the polite, formal version of you, and it shows respect but also creates a bit more distance. So what is the difference then? When to use what? As I mentioned, maybe you come from a culture where it's common, then you probably know how to do this. If this is new for you, let me explain you. So use je and jij when you are speaking to a colleague you work with directly, or someone has introduced themselves with their first name. So if I introduce myself with, hello, ik ben Ramon, then I show you that I want to be informal with you. So then you can just use je and jij. Or the other person is already using je with you. So maybe the person is talking to you and is using the word je already. Or you have been invited to say je. So you can be invited to say je, and that is called tutoyeren. I'll tell you later a little bit more about it. So that is how to use je or jij. So this is most common to use. I barely use u, you only use it in some formal situations, but it's important to know. So when to use u then. So you don't know the person and you want to be respectful. You want to show respect to the other person. Or for example, the person is clearly older or holds a formal role. So then you want to start off with u. Also, you're speaking to an external client or a guest in a formal setting. Or for example, you're writing a formal email or letter, especially first contact. So you can imagine writing in general is always a little bit formal than speaking. So it's good to remember that with writing you use the form u when you have a first contact. So when in doubt, start formal with u. So now let's talk about the phenomena that is switching from formal to informal, and that is tutoyeren. And tutoyeren comes from the French because it means tutoyer, right? It means call me you basically, and that means you switch from formal to informal. So tutoyeren is the Dutch word to describe the phenomena for switching from u to je or jij. So someone may invite you by saying zeg maar je. So you are talking to someone and you're using the formal way, so you say u all the time, and then the person says to you, zeg maar je, right? So it means you can basically say you in the informal version. And from that point on, you know that you can always speak je or jij to that person. Okay? So that's how it works. Je and jij you will use most often. U you will use in formal situations. So now I want you to think about your own culture or situation, so a reflection for you. So have you worked in cultures where there's a clear distinction between formal and informal speech? So if so, then probably you have a quite good feeling on how to do this. If not so, it's also interesting because now you realize that there are cultures where there is a difference between formal and informal speech. Okay, good. I hope that explanation is clear between the formal and the informal u. So now we're going to look at the language insight again. Okay, let's take a look at some language insight. How to say how are you. So we saw in the conversation a way how to say how are you, but let's expand a bit more on this, right? So we saw the sentence hoe gaat het met u? How are you doing? So that's a formal and polite way. And why? Because we use the word u, right? So if we want to make this less formal, we can basically use the same sentence and replace u with je, right? So that will look the following. Hoe gaat het met je? Hoe gaat het met je? How are you doing? And this would be more informal, but still polite. Or you can say, hoe gaat het ermee? And that means how are things going? It's a bit more general. The other ones are focused more on you, and this is more how are things going, more gentle. So it's neutral and friendly. Or actually, if you want to go to more casual, you can also say, hoe gaat het? Hoe gaat het? How is it going? Or, for example, people say, who is it? Who is it? And that means literally, how is it? And that's quite informal, but of course still friendly, right? So these are 5 expressions in how you can ask how someone is doing. So let's practice these together. You can follow me. Hoe gaat het met u? Hoe gaat het met u? Hoe gaat het met je? Hoe gaat het met je? Hoe gaat het ermee? Hoe gaat het ermee? Hoe gaat het? Hoe gaat het? Hoe is het? Hoe is het? Alright, so these are 5 different ways in how you can ask someone how they are doing. Are you ready for that? Because we're going to practice this. Here we are with a practice activity, and we're going to look at informal and formal greetings, and you have to decide in these scenarios which one you're going to use. So let's start with scenario 1. And this is a formal version. So you are in the office kitchen, or in the pantry they sometimes call it, and a senior manager you don't know well walks in. You're all impressed and like, ooh, I have to be formal, right? So you greet them and want to say, how are you doing? But you want to do that politely and respectfully. So how do you do that? Do you say A, hoe gaat het met u? Do you say B, hoe is het? Or do you say C, hoe gaat het met je? So which one would you use? A, B or C? Senior manager, you want to be polite and formal, so which are you going to use? And of course the answer is A, right? Because we're going to use the form with u in it. So the answer is, hoe gaat het met u? Okay? Now we have a different situation, so this is a bit of an informal scenario. So you see a colleague you talk to often, and you're friendly with each other, and you want to say, how's it going? So that's quite informal, right? How's it going? Hey man, how's it going? So which one would you use in this situation? Would you use A, hoe maakt u het? Would you say B, hoe gaat het? Or would you say C, hoe gaat het met u? So you can choose. Are you going to use A, B or C with someone you know quite well? And in this case you can use, for example, hoe gaat het? Hoe gaat het? So that is B. So your colleague comes in and you say, hey, hoe gaat het? That's the way how you can use the different greetings in the different situations. Okay? Geweldig gedaan. Good job. You've just taken another step with improving your Dutch. What did you find most helpful? Drop it in the comments below if you want. And if you want to learn even more Dutch, check out my online Dutch courses for step-by-step lessons, and you can find the link in the description of this video. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new lesson. So see you in the next video.